So my Patrol's got a few problems. It leaks fuel, it's got bugger all power, it doesn't run when you need it most, and in just a few days I've got to drive it 1,500 kilometers to another state. But we're not just gonna fix it, we're gonna upgrade it to something bigger and better. But let's just say the second-hand pump I bought has a few issues of its own.
Fingers crossed this helps the car a bit, I don't know. Oh no. That looks heavily modified. All right, so today is Christmas Eve and I should be catching up with friends and family, but instead I've got a bigger problem that needs attending to. Now, the Patrol's in the shed today because actually for the last 6 months or so, I've been chasing a fuel leak on this thing that I've just had no success in fixing, and it's getting to a point where I really need to do something about it, and it's leaving copious amounts of fuel on the ground wherever I park. And it also actually led to some fueling issues in the cars, how it runs. You would have seen when me and Sean went to the high country, we had a bunch of issues with the Patrol wanting to stall out and blow blue smoke. It wouldn't keep running. I think air was getting sucked in, and my brain is pretty much telling me that, well, if there's fuel getting out, there's a good chance there's probably air getting in from the same spot. So today we're trying to fix that. Now, when I very first experienced this issue, probably a year ago, I was able to fix it by replacing an O-ring on the advanced plate, which is on the outside of the pump. Fairly easy to get to, replace the O-ring, the leak stops. But in the last few months, the leak's been returning, and I've since replaced that O-ring again and found that it hasn't fixed the leak. So I was doing a bit more scratching around yesterday when I was servicing the car, and I found that the leak is actually coming from the other side of the injector pump. There's another advanced plate cover on the other side, and then the fuel's coming out and leaking across to where I thought it was coming out of. And I thought, oh, that's a bit of a pill. It's in a really tight spot against the block, but I tried my best to get in there and see if I could pull the advanced plate off and potentially stick it back in, but it's a spring-loaded plate, and I literally can't even get my fingers to the bolts. So you can probably imagine how difficult of a challenge it is. And that kind of leaves me with, I think the pump is gonna have to come out. So pretty much the plan is the injector pump has got to come out whether I like it or not. And while it's not a huge job, there's just a few things in the way, and it might be a little bit fiddly reaching into some of the parts. But we'll start by getting all the major stuff out of the way, and then we can work on getting this injector pump removed.
I first began by removing some stuff at the front of the engine bay to give myself access to the timing cover, and then could move on to removing any hoses and cabling that run to the injector pump itself.
This is so when I go to put the injector lines back on the injector pump, I get them in the right orientation. So I've just labelled which injector each line goes to. That'll make sure we get all the lines in the right spot.
The injector lines can be a little bit difficult to get to, but you've got to work from the outside in, and you should be able to get them all off.
All right, so I've got all the injector lines cracked, and that means the pump is almost ready to come out. But before we pull it out, I've got to pull the timing cover off the front, and that's going to show the timing gear. And then I'll rotate the car to top dead center, make sure it's in the right position before we think about pulling it off. So let's do that. Oh, there we go. Timing cover off. Just a bit of sludge build up in the front. I'm assuming it's just because, I don't know, oil that gets caught there or something, or I don't know, maybe fuel was leaking through the front seal or something. But that's our timing cover, and then down there, that's the timing gear on the front of the pump. And that, what we'll do next is we'll turn over the engine to top dead center, and you'll see the timing marks line up, and then we know it's in the right spot. It actually positions the keyway on the front of the injector pump where the gear goes onto at the top, so that it doesn't fall off and fall into the bottom of the timing case. So I've just turned over the motor to the timing mark on the harmonic balancer and matched it against the timing mark that's on the block. So that means we're at top dead center, but it can be top dead center cylinder 1 or top dead center cylinder 6. And the way we're gonna know, or the way we're gonna be able to find out, is actually by looking at our timing gear on the front of the injector pump. And if it is on top dead center cylinder 1, there'll be 2 timing marks that'll line up with the other timing gear. It's where that white mark is anyway, but it's hard to see. And there's a corresponding Z on the other timing gear. So we know we're at the correct top dead center anyway.
With the timing set correct, I could work on taking off the mounts to the pump itself, and then we could work on getting the drive gear off of the front of the pump. With the drive gear nut loosened, you can take to the front of the pump with a hammer just carefully to free the pump from its housing. In this case, it was pretty stuck on due to the tapered shaft on the front of the pump, so instead we opted to use a set of bearing pullers.
Oh, yep, there you go. All right, well that did it. All right, here we go. There we go. Oh, there we go. Got it out. And you can see straight away, that's what it all boils down to. That's the bit I was trying to get off. All right, so managed to get the injector pump out of the car, and as you can see, it's pretty grubby, but I wouldn't expect anything less than an injector pump that's done close to 600,000 Ks. So the reason I had to pull this out was because of this little cover here. Now this is actually the speed timer cover, and that's what I discovered that it was leaking from, a very bad leak, by the way. And as you'll see, I managed to get one bolt out of it while it was in the car very slowly with a tool that I made. But I quickly realized that it was going to be next to impossible to stick back on simply because I couldn't get my fingers to the bolts, and it's actually spring loaded as well. So there's a spring behind here and shims, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to clean the surface, replace the O-ring and do all that while it's in the car. So ended up just deciding to pull the injector pump out. Now you're probably thinking, what am I going to do? Just replace that O-ring, clean it up a bit and stick it back in the car? Well, I've actually got something better than a new O-ring. So this is an 11mm boost compensated injector pump, and I've actually had this sitting in the shed for a couple months now. I got it off a fella secondhand for a good price, and I wasn't really intending on using it straight away, but the time has sort of come to do it now that I had to pull this out anyway. So this pump is definitely an upgrade, so let's explain what's different about this compared to the old one. So this pump is out of a GU TD42 with a factory turbocharger, and the first thing you'll notice that's different about these two is this little thing sitting on the top. So this is actually a boost compensator on top of the pump, and essentially its job is to adjust the fueling of the injector pump based on the amount of boost pressure that your turbo is making. Now, my old pump didn't have one of these, and that means you've got a very basic linear fuel rate which isn't adjusted to your turbocharger, especially once you put one on a car that came NA from factory. And so this can make a huge improvement to not only the power delivery, but just the driving manners, and also things like fuel economy, and yeah, just making sure that it doesn't blow smoke everywhere. Now, the other thing you heard me mention was that this is actually an 11mm injector pump. And what that means is that it has an 11mm plunger that delivers the fuel, whereas my old one, that only had a 10mm plunger. And so, as you can imagine, a bigger plunger means more fuel delivery, which can essentially mean you can make more power, bigger turbos, that sort of stuff. Not that I'm planning on doing anything crazy, but it's definitely a nice thing to have. Now, another thing about this pump was that the fella that I bought it off, he actually had this tuned to suit his HC18, which is the same as I've got on my car, but he did have slightly more boost running through it, I think about 13 or 14 pound. So I will probably have to adjust the boost slightly to match how this pump is tuned. But other than that, it's a straight swap in, and I'll just have to pinch a couple little brackets and plugs and things off of this one to go into here, and then we can chuck it back in the car.
I swapped over some of the old components to the new pump. This included the stop solenoid wiring as well as some other fittings and bracketry for the mounting.
All right, so the pump is pretty much ready to put in the car, but when it comes to actually installing an injection pump, it's not just as simple as whacking it in there, bolting it up, and away you go. There's actually a lot more to it. You need to time this thing so that your engine runs correctly, so that the fuel squirts at the right time in the combustion cycle. So pretty much to do that, you have to use a special tool called a dial gauge, and this often has to be fitted to some sort of custom bracket that actually allows you to measure the plunger lift, which is located on the back of the pump. So Darren's made up this one for us, which will allow me to mount it securely off two of the bottom mounting bolts on the pump, and that way we can get our nice reading on our dial gauge.
I cleaned up the mounting face on the back of the timing cover and then carefully lowered our pump into its new home on the side of the TD42.
Yeah. All right, there you go.
With the pump now loosely mounted, we could then torque up the nut on the front of the drive gear, and then we were ready to begin our timing. Now, I'm going to try and explain how to sort of time the injector pump, but if you're serious about doing this job yourself, I highly recommend going and checking out Timmy Hashart's video all about injector pump timing and also tuning. I'll leave a link to it in the video description.
So we got the pump in, and you'd see there that we were fiddling around trying to get the pump timed correctly. So effectively what we're doing is timing the fuel delivery into the engine, and that fuel delivery is determined by a number, in our case between 0.64 and 0.7 mil, and that essentially correlates to the plunger lift. So the way you actually determine if you're getting the right timing is you start with the engine in top dead center, and then you'll actually be able to look down at that dial gauge I've got on the back of the injector pump. And as I bring it counterclockwise back off top dead center, you'll see it starts to come down. And then you'll actually see that even though I'm moving the crankshaft just there, the dial doesn't move. And so that means we've come off pump lift. So from there, we set our dial gauge to 0 like it is there. And then this is now where we look for our timing spec, which is that between 0.64 and 0.7 of a mil. So as I bring it back to my top dead center timing mark on the engine here, you'll see as I do that, as I bring it around, that dial gauge starts to rotate around, and right as I hit top dead center there, we're bang on our 0.7 mil. And so we've nipped it up and then done another check, a couple checks back and forth to make sure the timing is correct. And that's effectively how you know the pump is timed correctly. And that range of 0.64 to 0.7 is like, it's a pretty fine, margin. So you definitely need something like a dial gauge to be accurate in measuring it all correctly. But it looks like we've got it right. So hopefully with any luck, she'll run no worries at all. Now chances are when you bolt it up for the first time and check it, the pump's gonna be out by a fair bit, like 0.3 or 0.2 or whatever. And that's where you have to actually rotate the body of the pump to advance and retard the timing. So outwards or towards the chassis is to advance the timing, and inwards back towards the block is to retard the timing. So we had to move it out a little bit. I think we started about like 0.3 or something like that. So we've rotated the body of the pump outwards until we got our 0.7, and then we should be right to set it right there. This is for anyone who's ever had to change or will eventually change the injector pump on their TD42 that has the vacuum pump right below it. It is an absolute prick. I made a little tool with an Allen key and a 12mm socket, and I can only it's a struggle. It is a real struggle, but unless you want to remove the vacuum pump and replace all the seals in that, it's the only way to do it. So have fun. All right, so the pump's all secure with all the brackets, and next I'm gonna put the timing cover back on. So we've cleaned up both faces. I'll get a bit of RTV because it doesn't have a gasket. So put some of that on there and bolt that up, and then we can do the injector lines. So getting very close now. Let's do it.
The timing cover is relatively easy to get to, so you just want to make sure that you do a good job of sealing it up so it doesn't leak and you don't ever have to pull it off again.
All right, so time to do the injectors. I've got my little diagram so that I know what one to go to what one. Should be pretty straightforward, so we'll start putting them on.
Now there is a bit of an order in which you'll have to put the injector lines back on, or else you won't be able to get to them all with the spanner to tighten them up.
All right, so the injector pump is all in. I've plumbed up all the hoses, reconnected all the wires, that sort of thing. We had to do a little bit of messing around getting the banjo fitting on the top to seal just because the washers were worn, but we've got some other ones off a Toyota pump which have sealed it up. I've primed it. Now the last thing to do, now that we've got our boost compensated pump, is I actually have to run a boost line from the intake manifold down to the pump. So the boost aneroid on top has a little port in, like I showed you guys before, and so I've got some boost line and a boost T, or just a T-piece, sorry, that I'll run off the existing line that goes to my boost gauge, and then that'll run down to the pump. And then we'll be looking pretty good for a start.
So with a boost line now running from our intake down to our boost compensated pump, we're ready to throw the battery back in, and then we can get ready for a start.
All right, so it's all plumbed up and we're just about ready to start now. I've already gone and primed the pump because that obviously would have emptied out of fuel while it's been sitting. So that's primed. I checked for fuel coming back through the return. Now the injector lines themselves to the injectors, chances are they would have drained out, so there's going to be air in there. So what I'll do before we start it, I'll go and crack each one. And then when we start it, we can look for fuel coming out, make sure they've bled through, and then it'll want to start. And then we can see how it idles and that sort of thing, because the fueling might be slightly different. It might idle a bit high. Check that when I turn the AC on, if it idles too high, that sort of stuff. And yeah, then we can go and take it for a drive. So yes, I guess we'll crank it over, see how it goes, and obviously look for leaks too, because I've undone a bunch of fuel lines, make sure that all the lines on the back of the injector pump aren't leaking, that sort of thing. So, all right, see how we go. No fuel coming out of them yet.
Now, as you can imagine, I was a little bit nervous that the car didn't want to start straight away. I thought I might have stuffed up the timing or something like that, but I've got to remember that it was a dry pump that went in, so we have to fill the pump full of fuel and then it'll transfer to the injectors. So you really just have to give it a good chance to bleed all the way through.
Yeah, well, we got fuel to come through the return. Oh, fuel. Oh, fuel's coming out of the injectors. Hold on a second. Sounds very healthy. Yeah. Oh, it sounds perfect. Oh, it runs really well. That's awesome. That's good because it means we got the timing and stuff all correct. Because if it was out, you'd know straight away.
So I gave the pump a good check over for any potential fuel leaks, and then we could bring the car out of the shed ready for its first test drive.
All seems right, all the throttle response and everything. Feels good. So we're going to be able to watch everything that happens on the JRP 14-in-1. So you've got boost pressure, EGT. The boost pressure I'm not expecting to change because we haven't changed any wastegates or anything. So we should still get our 9.5 pound. But the only thing that will potentially change is our EGT and just visually the amount of smoke that comes out of the back. So there's a good chance we won't really see too many differences. Obviously the big one being that my fuel leak should be now fixed. So we got a new pump in, sorted out the fuel leak, which is awesome. But pretty much having the boost, the slightly bigger pump and having the boost compensator on top, it's just gonna mean that the fueling can be adjusted more precisely for better air fuel ratios throughout your power range. So, you know, no smoke down low, but then just keeping the required amount of fuel as the engine accelerates. I'm not sure exactly how it's been tuned. We'll have to see. And so this is pretty much giving me that, you know, sort of pre-upgrade that if I ever want to put a bigger turbo on, I'm going to be able to, which is good. All right, main drag, let's see how we do. Oh. So my EGT's very low and that's foot flat, no power. So something's, down low I can feel it's good, but as soon as it gets to like 2 grand, nothing.
So after your foot to the floor, you only get, what, 6 PSI boost?
And when I go back to 3rd, it'll be a bit more accurate. See that? See it just stalled out on me? See that? Like that's foot flat and it's just
okay.
like...
So someone's not quite right.
Yeah, something's not exactly right. Like that's foot flat.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Won't get the full boost.
That's not ideal.
Not ideal, that's right. We'll have a quick look. I just want to see if there's any leaks or anything like that. We'll just have a quick look under the bonnet. Make sure our boost lines are still on. So we've still got our boost line. I don't think I can see any leaks. It's not fueling correctly. Might have to take it home.
Oh, no.
I'm not 100% sure what that is. Yeah, like it's getting fuel, but it's not getting enough fuel. Up to about 2 grand, it's good.
And then it just dies out.
Oh, actually even before, like that's it, just dying out. Is it blowing smoke? No. Oh no.
So that's like max power.
Yeah. What about if I just rev it out flat?
Is that running out of fuel doing that?
Don't know. It won't rev past $2,000. Doesn't really want to get over, like it doesn't want to get up towards $3,000. Like yeah, I can't even accelerate to 100 at this rate.
So it was obvious we have a major issue with how the pump is fueling, but I'm pretty sure it's coming down to tuning, so I just have to do a lot of road driving and trial and error to get it right.
All right, so I've been taking the car for a bit of a drive, managed to get it somewhere where I could do like 100k an hour and that sort of thing. And I think it just needs to be tuned different. It seems to me that my off boost fuel is too low. Like when it's not reached full boost and it's climbing, it's very slow to start, and the EGTs don't climb very quickly at all. It's very slow to take off. But then on the other hand, when I'm up on boost and on the freeway, as soon as you put your foot down to try go slightly over 100 or to keep it up a hill, the EGTs just soar. So to me, that's saying that I either need to increase the fuel down low, well, I do need to increase the fuel down low, and either need to decrease the fuel up top or increase my amount of boost pressure to match that fuel. To be honest, I probably should just take it to someone to get it tuned. So as you saw there, not too impressive on the first drive, a few little issues, but I do believe it's down to tuning because this pump was set up for different boost pressures, that sort of thing. So what I'm gonna do first, because I think it's lacking down low, I'm gonna adjust the off boost fuel, which is the little nut and screw on top of the compensator. So that effectively sets like your base fuel level or like the amount of fuel that's delivered before the spring and boost pressure affects the pin. So we'll turn that up a bit and we'll see if that makes a bit of an improvement. Fingers crossed this helps the car a bit. I don't know, otherwise I'm getting a bit worried about this pump. Hopefully I didn't stuff up. Oh. Way punchier down low. Much punchier down low than it was before. All right, that's a good response. So we've added more fuel down low. Now, down low's all right. It didn't feel like up top it was doing that good. Just kind of bogs down up top. So, and also the EGTs are still high up top as well. I don't know, I reckon I'm gonna have to pull apart the boost compensator on top. We'll get it home, because I'm curious to have a peek inside anyway at what's in there. So we might find something. So I'm just gonna pull the boost hat off, and below we should have a diaphragm as well as a spring and the pin that is responsible for fueling at a, sort of rate that varies with your boost pressure. Today's a 40-degree day on Boxing Day. The car is very hot, but that's not gonna stop me. I gotta get to the bottom of this issue because I got places to be. All right, let's see what's underneath here, eh? All right, so there's our diaphragm come off. So, and there's our pin, and hang on a second. What? That does not look normal. That looks heavily modified, like proper cowboy tuned with a grinder. What about our spring? Holy crap. Far out, that's a tough spring. Is that 9 pound worth of spring? Bloody hell. That is stiff. Hang on, let me show you close to this. So here is our diaphragm, and I don't know if you guys can see that. That side has been just mauled by a grinder. Like, I don't know if you can see there. So that cone, that's an eccentric cone, and on one side they've taken a grinder to it to essentially they've essentially tried to give the pin more room to drop and still apply fuel. So probably to explain the way this works, essentially it's kind of hard to tell, but inside the boost compensator, there's a little pin so the pin sits in the shaft, goes up and down. On the side, there's a little pin that as you press the throttle goes in and out, and depending on how much it's poking out, determines how much fuel goes into the engine. So they've effectively ground out the side of that so that the pin can travel further in the side and deliver more fuel. And they've also, looks like they've cut off the bottom to make this fall further, because normally this has shims up underneath here, underneath this diaphragm, and there's none under it. And so they've cut the bottom and they've also grinded away from the pin to allow more fuel. So that's probably why my EGTs were so high. And then also, not to mention, this spring, like camera's never gonna do it justice, but that is a firm spring. Like, I don't know if my 9-pounder boost is even squishing that. And if that's the case, then chances are the boost compensator wasn't even really doing anything. Maybe at max boost, it was pushing in a little bit, but not much. So that's why perhaps the fueling was so crap throughout the range. So I reckon I'll see if I can find another spring. Oh, wow, actually what I'll do, definitely, I'm gonna turn this around to the there's still like a factory side on it that hasn't been touched. I reckon I'll flip it around to the factory side to see if that helps. And I also might see if we've got like a smaller or lighter weight spring that can potentially allow the boost compensator to work better. And we'll just see if it makes a difference, because at this point I feel like we need to make drastic changes to see if we can fix what's going wrong. So let's try that. And it's also worth mentioning that down there's a little star, and you can wind that like in or out to adjust the tension on the spring. All right, so I managed to find a spring in the shed. It's not quite the same height or exactly the same diameter, but it does fit, and it's a lot softer. It seems like it's gonna be much better to, you know, work with the amount of boost pressure I'm working with. This setup really looks like they were tuning it for peak power figures high in the rev range. So like, considering the amount they've gouged out of this compensator pin to allow for fuel, and also the tension of this spring, they didn't want this thing to squash until the thing was on like 15, 16 pounds of boost, which kind of scares me for how the pump spin worked, but I don't know, we'll just see. In with our fresh spring, and then what I'm gonna actually do is put this on the factory side. So that side that isn't carved out, and we're gonna see if that helps on our factory pressures. So we'll whack that in there, and then yeah, hopefully this makes a difference when we take it for a drive. All right, so we've messed around with the boost hat on the pump. Fingers crossed this makes a big difference. I'm looking, this has got to do something surely after seeing that. Let's see. Oh, yep. Definitely feels better in the top end now. I don't know, this road tuning stuff is just like literally trial and error. Everyone's gonna say you've got to get it, send it to a tuner, and I will be. The problem is I just need to get the car in a state where it's drivable, all right, because I'm planning to go away over New Year's, which is like not even a week away. And I was hoping to have the car running. This is like a last minute job. So anyway. All right, so there you go. So huge improvement in changing that boost comp pin and the spring. I think it drives a lot better already now. I'm still slightly worried about the EGTs. So what I'm actually gonna do next, you know, considering that I've seen how the pump has been modified and tuned for bigger boost, I'm also assuming that they've touched the main fuel screw on the back, which generally speaking, from what I've read online for these 11mm pumps, you shouldn't have to adjust the rear one to get more fuel. It should be able to apply enough fuel with the factory setting on the rear screw, and you should only have to adjust the boost comp. But I'm kind of worried that based on the EGTs I'm seeing and also the way it was tuned before, I think it might have been touched as well. So I'm gonna take like half a turn out of the main fuel screw and just see how that affects things. And then we can always wind it back if it doesn't seem to make any difference or if it gets worse. So we'll try that next. All right, and these might seem like quite large adjustments, but sometimes it's easier to do a more major adjustment to see if it makes a difference. If you do real fine adjustments, you might not notice a difference, and then you don't know whether what you're doing is even right. So if you do a major adjustment, it's easy to sort of go big and then say, all right, that made a difference, and then dial back if you have to. So anyway, let's go take it for a drive. I'm just keeping a close eye on the EGTs and also the boost temp on the JRP 14-in-1. That's pretty much all I've got to go off, so. Pretty good, accelerated pretty well. The big test will be up the hill. EGTs are a lot more stable, which is good. Not seeing, it's sort of peaking out about 550, which is good, but we've still got a decent amount of power, which it used to do that, and today's a hot day as well. I reckon we might have got it pretty good here. I don't want to call myself a tuner, but I will call myself a cowboy tuner. I reckon that's pretty drivable. That is pretty drivable. It's taken a bit to get us here, a bit of adjusting, but I think I've got it pretty good. So I think that's about as good as we're going to get when it comes to tuning the GQ on the road. There's really only so far you can go with road tuning, just because you're not replicating the same, you know, conditions with every time you press the throttle, that sort of thing, hills and that sort of stuff. So it really needs to go to a tuner. I did just want to get it running good enough because I'm heading away just in a couple days to South Australia, and I just wanted to make sure it was all going to run pretty sweet, get decent fuel economy, and be able to sit on 100k an hour. Now, I am very keen to get this thing properly tuned by a professional, because it's going to mean it runs the most efficiently in terms of fuel consumption, its power output, and everything else that goes along with it, running cool, all that sort of stuff. So if you have any recommendations for tuners in the Melbourne area that know their way around a TD42 and have tuned plenty before, I'd highly appreciate if you could leave them down in the comments below, because I've got to get this thing tuned sooner or later. And I just want to make sure that I send it to someone who knows what they're doing. But anyway, that's going to wrap up the episode for today. So I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and I look forward to showing you what I get up to on my trip away over New Year's. So keep an eye out for that. But until then, make sure you leave a like, get subscribed, and we'll see you in the next one.